Emma sat in the quiet room, her eyes locked on the camera. The room around her was still, but her heart was racing as she began to speak. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but the moment I'm about to share changed my life forever. It all happened at our daughter Olivia's graduation. I should have been celebrating, watching my daughter take her next step into the world, proud of everything she had accomplished. But instead, something happened that I never, in a million years, expected. It was supposed to be a proud moment for our family, but my husband, David, well, he decided it would be the perfect moment to completely shatter everything. I remember standing there, watching Olivia walk across the stage, her smile so wide, her eyes shining with excitement. I felt the pride swell in my chest, but also a strange emptiness. We were all there, surrounded by family and friends, witnessing a moment that should have been filled with joy. But then David stood up. It felt like time stopped. The moment he stood, everyone around me fell silent. I looked at him, confused, wondering why he was interrupting this beautiful day. His voice cut through the silence, flat and devoid of emotion. He didn't even look at me when he spoke, as if he was talking to a room full of strangers. He said, "I regret marrying you, Emma. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, and I swear I could feel them crash against me, like they were physically knocking the breath out of me. The crowd gasped. I felt everyone's eyes on me, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen. What was I supposed to do? What could I say in that moment? I wish I could say I screamed, or that I ran after him, demanding answers. But I didn't. I just walked out. I didn't make a scene. I didn't shout. I couldn't. My body was numb, my mind reeling. The pain, the humiliation, the complete shock of hearing those words in front of our daughter, in front of all our friends and family. It was unbearable. But somehow, I stayed calm. I held it together, and I walked out. I'm sure people were whispering. I'm sure they were wondering what was going through my head. But I couldn't focus on that. I had to get out of there. I remember walking down the hall, my heart racing with every step. I don't even know how I made it to the parking lot. My hands were shaking, but I didn't break down. Not then. Not yet. I drove home in complete silence, the car feeling like a prison. I couldn't even think about what David had said or why he had done it. I was still too shocked, still trying to make sense of it all. But in the quiet of my home, the reality started to set in. And that's when I realized something that changed everything for me. In that moment, I thought my world had just ended. But what I did next? That's the part I never expected either. What happened next? How did I manage to take control of this shocking situation? Stick with me, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more unbelievable stories of strength and empowerment. Emma sits quietly, her eyes focused on the camera, her voice steady but laced with the weight of years of unspoken pain. David and I had been together for over 15 years. We built a life. Our home, our family, everything in between. In the beginning, it felt like we had it all. We were a team. We worked together, we raised our kids together, and I thought that was enough. I thought that's what love was. The daily grind, the quiet moments, the small acts of love that would carry us through. But somewhere along the way, I started to notice something. David stopped seeing me. He stopped seeing us. In the early years, everything was so different. David would come home from work, and even after a long day, he'd make time for me. We'd talk about our dreams, our plans. He'd surprise me with a small gift, a touch, or a simple, "How was your day?" We were partners, and I thought that would never change. But change, it did. Slowly at first, just small things. He'd come home later and later, and I found myself sitting alone at dinner. His mind seemed to be elsewhere, not with me. The conversations became shorter and then even more infrequent. I remember trying to reach out to him, making dinner like I always did, asking how his day was, but he'd just brush me off, his attention more on his phone or the TV. I tried to make him understand. I tried everything, but the more I gave, the more he pulled away. And all I was left with was the silent, suffocating emptiness of a marriage that no longer existed. I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones, even though I didn't want to admit it. I thought maybe it was just a phase. He was busy with work, stressed with the responsibilities he had. After all, David was a businessman, and I knew how hard he worked. I thought, maybe if I just waited long enough, he'd come around. But as the months turned into years, I began to realize he wasn't coming around. I kept convincing myself that this too shall pass. Maybe he just needed time to figure things out. But time kept slipping by, and we were only getting further apart. I remember the first time I truly felt the distance between us. It was a simple thing, a conversation, or rather the lack of one. We were sitting on the couch, both of us in the same room, yet so far apart. I tried to start a conversation, but it was like talking to a wall. David just nodded, didn't look up, barely even responded. I sat there, my heart sinking, and in that moment, I realized I had been living in a marriage where I was completely invisible. But I kept telling myself it was just a phase. I kept pushing through, thinking we'll get through this. After all, that's what I had always done. Tough it out, keep going. And so, I waited. I waited for him to notice me again, to see us, to remember the woman he married. But when he stood up at Olivia's graduation, in front of everyone, and announced he regretted marrying me, well, that was the moment I knew. I had nothing left to hold on to. I tried everything. I waited. I gave him my heart, my time, my love, but in the end, I had nothing left. And when he said those words, I realized I was invisible to him, and I had been for years. I thought I could wait it out, thought I could stick it out because I believed in the promises we made to each other. I thought I had to believe that everything would eventually get better. But when the man I loved, the father of my children, looked me in the eyes and said he regretted marrying me in front of everyone, I realized it was over. There was no more pretending, no more waiting. Emma takes a long pause, her voice quieter now, but still resolute. I wasn't just grieving the man I thought I knew. I was grieving the life we had built, the love that had slowly died without me realizing it. And in that moment, when David announced the divorce, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the rage I thought I would feel. I felt nothing. I was just empty. I felt completely and utterly empty. But that emptiness, that moment, was the beginning of something else. A moment where I realized that I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need his approval to move forward, to rebuild my life, to rediscover myself. It was time to stop waiting and start living for myself. Emma's voice trembled slightly as she began to recall the most painful moment of her life, her eyes distant, yet unwavering. I couldn't believe what was happening. I remember thinking, this can't be happening. Not here, not now. This is supposed to be a celebration of our daughter's achievement, not the moment he rips apart our family. I stood there, frozen, as David's words echoed through the hall. My mind was screaming, but my body just couldn't react. Olivia, our daughter, was standing on stage, radiant with pride, receiving her diploma. The joy on her face, the excitement in her eyes, that was supposed to be the moment we celebrated. But instead, everything around me turned to a blur. David's voice wasn't loud, but it carried, cutting through the room like a knife. He didn't even seem to care. He didn't even look at me when he spoke. I regret marrying you, Emma. I want a divorce. Just like that, in front of everyone, family, friends, and our daughter. In front of people who had no idea what was going on behind closed doors. I thought, this can't be real. This is a nightmare. I looked around at the people sitting near us, at their shocked expressions, and all I could do was stand there. I didn't know how to react. But then it hit me. He wasn't just saying this to me. He was saying this to everyone. He was announcing it in the middle of what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives. In front of our daughter. And in that moment, I realized something I didn't want to face. He was done. He had made his decision, and he didn't care about the consequences. He didn't care about us. I remember looking at Olivia, my heart breaking as I saw the confusion and pain in her eyes. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't know why her father, the man who was supposed to be there to support her, would say something so cruel at such a significant moment in her life. I didn't even look at David. I couldn't. I didn't want to see him. The words kept repeating in my head, but I couldn't find the strength to scream or to shout back. All I wanted to do was hold Olivia and tell her everything was okay. But in that moment, I realized I had to hold myself together. I walked out of that ceremony, my steps slow and deliberate. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I wouldn't let them. Not then, not in front of everyone. I walked past the rows of people, avoiding their eyes, keeping my head held high, even as the weight of the situation felt like it was crushing me. I made it outside, and I leaned against the cool brick wall of the building, taking deep breaths, trying to steady my shaking hands. My mind was racing. What do I do now? I didn't know how I was supposed to fix this, how I was supposed to move forward after such a public humiliation. But I knew one thing. I had a choice to make. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I just walked away because in that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. I could either let him destroy me or I could fight back and take control. I couldn't let David win. I couldn't let him have that power over me. I had spent years putting my life on hold, trying to make a marriage work that was already long gone. Now, here he was, ripping it apart in front of our daughter, and I was expected to just stand there and take it. That wasn't going to happen. I didn't know what my next move was, but I knew that the first step was walking away from that moment. I had to take control of my life, and I had to do it now. Want to know what happened next? You won't believe how I turned this situation around. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the ending of this unbelievable story. Emma's voice was calm, but there was a quiet power in her words. I walked out, and I didn't know where I was going. My body felt like it was on autopilot, my steps moving without me even thinking. I could have broken down right then and there. I could have let the pain and humiliation swallow me whole, but that's not who I was. I wasn't going to let David take everything from me. Not in front of our daughter, not in front of anyone. Emma's eyes briefly closed as she remembered the overwhelming emotions that tried to consume her. When I left the graduation, I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't face him, couldn't let him see the tears in my eyes, and I couldn't let our daughter see the way he'd just torn our lives apart. My mind was spinning, racing through everything that had just happened. But I couldn't afford to get lost in it. I couldn't afford to let the whirlwind of pain and anger take over. I left the graduation, walking through the halls of that empty building, the sound of my heels echoing against the walls. My mind was racing, thoughts flashing through my head, but my steps were steady. I was telling myself, you can do this, Emma. You can get through this. I walked through the parking lot, heading to my car, but I didn't get in immediately. I paused, standing there under the bright sky. I had to calm myself. My whole world had just been ripped apart, but I had a choice. I could let this break me. I could fall into the darkness, drown in the embarrassment, in the pain of being publicly humiliated by the man I thought I loved. Or I could do something different. I stood there for a while, staring at the horizon, the weight of everything sinking in. But as I stood there, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It couldn't be. I had so much left to give. I had so much to live for, and I wasn't going to let David take it from me. I wasn't going to let him rob me of my dignity. I was going to take control of my life, and I wasn't going to beg for a man who already took me for granted. I had to make a decision. I wasn't going to beg for a man who already took me for granted. I was going to fight for my dignity. And for the first time in years, I was going to fight for me. The decision was clear. I had spent so long waiting for David to see me, to recognize me, to love me the way I deserved. But he wasn't going to change. I wasn't going to change him. I couldn't keep waiting for him to be the man I wanted him to be. I had to stop putting my happiness in his hands. If I wanted to move forward, I needed to stop looking back. I needed to stop being the woman who always waited for things to get better. I got into my car, the engine starting with a low hum, and I just drove. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to get away from everything for a moment. I needed to breathe, to think. As I drove through the streets, the tears started to come, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of hopelessness. They weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of release. Tears of knowing that, for the first time in a long time, I was finally free. Free from a life that was no longer mine. Free from a marriage that had stopped working years ago. Free from the fear that had held me in place. I ended up at a small park, a quiet place I used to visit with Olivia when she was younger. The swing set was still there, and the memory of pushing her on those swings flooded my mind. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I was sitting there, alone with my thoughts, when I realized how much I had let myself be consumed by the idea of David, of us, of trying to fix something that had long been broken. But that was no longer my responsibility. I was done trying to fix him, to fix us. I needed to start fixing me. For the first time in so long, I took a deep breath and allowed myself to believe that I could be happy again, without him. And it wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would just fall into place. But what I knew for sure was that I had a choice now, and I was going to take control. I was going to choose happiness for myself, no one else. I didn't need David's approval, his love, or his validation. I was going to create a life I was proud of, a life that belonged to me. I drove home that night with a new sense of clarity. When I walked through the front door, I wasn't walking in with the broken, defeated woman I was earlier. I was walking in with a woman who knew she had the power to shape her own future. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let David dictate my emotions or my future anymore. The world felt different, almost like a fresh start. I had been living in the shadow of someone else's decisions for too long. Now it was time to live for me. I started making small changes, things that were mine, things that I had put on hold for so many years because I thought my happiness depended on others. But I was done. I began taking up old hobbies again, things I used to love but had abandoned. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I started to focus on myself, not for David, not for anyone, but for me. I didn't need David to define my happiness. I didn't need his love to fill the hole he left behind. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It was about reclaiming what was mine: my happiness, my life, my identity. And that, I realized, was the real victory. And Olivia was my rock through it all. She saw the change in me, and her support was the final confirmation that I was making the right choice. She didn't need me to be perfect. She just needed me to be strong. And I was. Emma sat alone in her quiet living room, the weight of the past few days still heavy on her shoulders, but her posture was different now. She wasn't slouched in defeat, but sitting with a sense of purpose, the transformation that had begun in her heart now radiating in her every movement. I never thought I'd feel this way again. I didn't know what I was capable of until I was forced to face it. But now, looking back, I can see that what David tried to destroy, my confidence, my dignity, my sense of self, he only made stronger. And it wasn't just me that I was fighting for anymore. It was for Olivia, too. The days after that shocking moment at the graduation felt like a blur. But in that blur, something clear began to emerge. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let my daughter see me crumble because of David's cruelty. I wasn't going to let anyone see me weak. The woman who had walked out of that ceremony, calm, composed, and collected, wasn't the woman I had been before. For so long, I had placed my worth in David's hands. I had believed that everything I did, every sacrifice I made, every part of myself I gave to him, was part of what made me valuable. But in that one moment, when he tore it all down with his careless words, I saw the truth. I had to find my own worth. I had to find my own strength. I started by making small changes. I signed up for yoga, something I used to love but had long abandoned. I began to spend more time with friends, reconnecting with people who had always been there for me but whom I had pushed away over the years, always too busy being the perfect wife and mother. I began to make time for myself, time that had always been reserved for everyone else but never for me. I took walks in the park, something simple and peaceful, but it gave me the time to reflect, time to breathe, time to think about how far I had come and how much more I had yet to discover. But the real turning point came when I took a deep breath and decided that it was time to face David again. The day I called him, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I was going to scream at him, beg him to see the damage he had done, or if I was going to quietly say goodbye. But I knew I needed to speak to him, to get closure. Not for him, but for me. When he picked up the phone, I heard the hesitation in his voice. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't the indifference I had grown used to either. He sounded uncertain. He had always been sure of everything. But now, the certainty was gone. I asked him to meet me at the house, not because I needed to beg him to stay, but because I knew I needed to speak my truth. I needed him to hear me. I needed to show him that I wasn't the same woman he had discarded. When David walked through the door, it was like everything came rushing back. The pain, the neglect, the years of silence between us. I saw him standing there, his hands in his pockets, trying to maintain his usual calm demeanor. But I saw the cracks. I saw the man who had been so sure of everything suddenly unsure of himself. You don't get to walk back into my life and act like nothing happened, David. You don't get to just decide that I'm someone you can throw away and then walk away without facing the consequences. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he just looked at me, almost like he was seeing me for the first time. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to beg for his attention, his affection, or his approval. I wasn't just confronting David. I was confronting the version of myself who had allowed this to happen for so long. I was standing up for the woman I had almost forgotten about. The woman who once had dreams, ambitions, and a sense of self that didn't revolve around anyone else. I've spent years trying to fix something that was broken from the start, and I've lost myself in the process. But not anymore. I'm done. I'm done waiting for someone who doesn't appreciate me. I'm done with the person I thought I was supposed to be in your life. I'm done being invisible. David tried to speak, but I cut him off. For once, I wasn't afraid of what he might say. I wasn't afraid of him rejecting me anymore because the truth was, I was rejecting him first. I was rejecting the version of our life that had hurt me and that had held me back for far too long. I told him that I didn't need him. Not anymore. I didn't need him to make me feel worthy or to give me approval. I didn't need him to make me feel like I was enough. I was already enough. We spent the next few minutes talking, but it wasn't the kind of conversation we'd had before. It wasn't filled with accusations or tears. It was honest. It was raw. It was the conversation I had been waiting for, but the one I didn't need to change anything. I didn't need to convince him of anything. The moment I realized that, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding on to him anymore. It wasn't about revenge, and it wasn't about making him pay. It was about reclaiming my own power. I was letting go, and for the first time, I could breathe again. After the conversation ended, I felt like a new woman. It wasn't that I had all the answers, or that everything was magically better. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't need to fix anyone else. I needed to fix myself. I needed to rediscover who I was outside of this marriage, outside of being David's wife, outside of being a mother. For the first time, I started living for myself. I started making decisions that were based on what I wanted, not what anyone else needed. And with each passing day, I felt stronger. David thought he could take everything from me. But what he didn't know was that he didn't have the power to take my strength, my future, or my happiness. That was mine, and I was taking it back. Olivia, my daughter, saw the change in me. She started spending more time with me, supporting me as I rebuilt. She wasn't just seeing me as her mother anymore. She was seeing me as a woman who was learning to live her life again. I wanted to be the example for her that I never had growing up. A woman who knew her worth, who didn't settle for anything less than respect and love. And in that moment, I realized something. This was only the beginning. There was so much more out there for me. So much more for Olivia and for me to explore, to rebuild, and to enjoy. And for the first time in years, I believed it. I believed in myself. I believed in the woman I was becoming. I was no longer afraid of what the future held, because for the first time, I was in control of it. Emma sat in the living room, her posture straight and confident. Her eyes were focused, but there was an unmistakable warmth behind them, a reflection of the strength she had discovered within herself. She had gone through so much, but she knew she was no longer the woman she used to be. After the conversation with David, I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't going to let him or anyone else dictate how I lived my life anymore. But that didn't mean the road ahead was easy. No, it was still going to be hard. But for the first time, I knew I wasn't walking alone. I had walked away from a marriage, yes. But in doing so, I also walked towards something bigger. I walked towards the woman I had buried for so long. The woman who had dreams, who had hopes, who had a voice. The woman who had been silenced by years of neglect, by putting everyone else first, by living in the shadow of someone else's life. But now I was finally ready to live for myself. The first step was simple. I had to focus on Olivia. I couldn't just fall into the despair that wanted to consume me. I couldn't let her see me broken, not after everything we'd been through together. She had seen enough. She had witnessed the unraveling of our family, and I wasn't about to let her see the woman she admired fall apart. So I started small. I started with the things that used to make me happy, the things that made me feel alive. I went back to the things I had put on hold for years, the things that had once defined me before I became just David's wife, just a mother. I began reading books again, something I had once loved but had stopped doing because I'd been too busy. I took walks in the morning, not just to get out of the house, but to reconnect with myself, to remember who I was before life became all about everyone else's needs. I signed up for painting classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the courage to pursue. And slowly, I began to find pieces of myself that I had forgotten. I realized that I wasn't just someone's wife. I wasn't just a mother. I was Emma. I was a woman who had her own thoughts, her own dreams, and her own future to create. But just as important as finding those parts of me was realizing that I didn't have to do it alone. I had people in my life who cared about me, true friends, people who had always been there, even when I had been too focused on my marriage to see them. My best friend Nora was one of those people. She had been by my side for years, supporting me even when I didn't think I needed it. I remember one evening, a few weeks after the divorce, when I was sitting with Nora at our favorite cafe. We were talking about everything that had happened, and I could see the concern in her eyes. But that night, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like the woman who had just been humiliated in front of everyone. No, I felt stronger. "I'm proud of you, Emma," Nora said, taking a sip of her coffee. "You've been through hell, but look at you. You're taking control of your life. You're doing what's best for you and Olivia." And for the first time, I truly believed it. I wasn't just surviving. I was living again. I was moving forward, and I wasn't looking back. It wasn't just my personal transformation. It was Olivia, too. I had made a promise to myself that I was going to be the mother she deserved. The mother who didn't just exist in the background, but who was strong, independent, and fully alive. I wanted to be the woman who she could look up to. The woman who could show her that no matter what life throws at you, you can always rise above it. The first day Olivia came home from school after David's departure, I didn't know what to expect. I had been so caught up in my own transformation that I wasn't sure how it would affect her. But as she walked through the door, I saw her smile, genuine and wide. "Mom, you look different," she said, as she dropped her backpack and rushed over to give me a hug, and that was when I knew. She could see the change in me. She saw her mother finally standing tall, no longer a shadow of her former self, but a woman who had found her strength again. I didn't need to hear David apologize. I didn't need him to come back and make things right. What I needed was already here. Olivia, my friends, and most of all, myself. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, without his help. And I was finally living it on my terms. But the road ahead wasn't smooth. There were moments of doubt. moments when I still second-guessed myself. I still had to deal with the awkwardness of divorce proceedings, the tension with David's family, the judgment from people who didn't understand why I couldn't just forgive him. But through it all, I stayed strong. I continued to put myself first. I made decisions for me. I focused on my own healing, my own journey, and I didn't apologize for it. David, of course, tried to reach out. He called, he sent texts. At first, I was tempted to respond, to open up the door again. But then I remembered how far I had come. I remembered the woman I was becoming and the lessons I had learned. I wasn't the same person who had stood by him, waiting for his attention and affection. No, now I was someone who knew her worth. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. David thought he could tear me down, but he didn't realize that the more he tried, the stronger I became. I wasn't going to beg for his love. I wasn't going to chase after him. I was going to build the life I deserved, without him in it. Olivia and I spent more time together, enjoying each other's company, rediscovering the joy in our lives that had been overshadowed for so long. I helped her with her school projects, took her out to dinner, and we spent quiet evenings talking about everything, about life, the future, and the lessons we were both learning. For so long, I had allowed myself to feel invisible. I had allowed myself to believe I wasn't worthy of the life I deserved. But no more. I started to see myself through a different lens, one that wasn't clouded by regret or guilt. David didn't just leave me that day. He left behind a woman who didn't believe she was enough. But I fought back. I fought to find the woman I had buried, and when I found her, I never looked back. The most important part of this journey, however, wasn't just about my healing. It was about breaking the cycle for Olivia. I wanted to show her that she didn't have to accept less than she deserved. I wanted her to see what a woman can do when she knows her worth, when she doesn't let anyone define her. I didn't want her to go through the same struggles I had. I wanted her to be proud of who she was, no matter what. And that's when I made another choice. I made the choice to move out of the house we had shared for so many years. I knew it was time for a fresh start. It was time to take control of my environment, to create a space that reflected the new woman I was becoming. Olivia and I found a new home, a small, cozy place, but it was ours. It felt like a new beginning, a new chapter, and I was determined to fill it with joy, laughter, and freedom. David didn't have the power to take my life away from me anymore. I had taken my life back. I had built something from the ground up, not alone, but with the support of people who loved me. I had become the woman I had always wanted to be, the woman I had hidden from for so long. But there was one last piece of the puzzle. I had to learn how to forgive myself. For the longest time, I had blamed myself for staying in a marriage that didn't make me happy. I thought I had failed, that I hadn't been strong enough to leave sooner. But through this journey, I learned that it wasn't about when I left or how I stayed. It was about what I did after I walked away. It was about taking back control, taking back my dignity, and finally learning to love myself. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the weight that holds you down. I forgave myself for the woman I had been. And I forgave David, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the pain. I needed to move forward, and for the first time in years, I truly felt free. I thought losing everything would break me, but I found that in losing everything, I found my true strength. If my story resonated with you, if you're finding the strength to reclaim your life, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel for more empowering stories, and leave a comment telling me how you've taken control of your life. You won't want to miss the next story where we continue exploring the power of healing and self-empowerment.